The early morning sun filtered through the trees lining Maple Street, casting a warm golden hue over the tidy lawns of Willow Grove. The quiet hum of suburbia was interrupted only by the occasional chirp of a bird or the distant sound of a lawnmower in the distance. The scent of freshly cut grass wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of dew-laden leaves, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing within Maria Bennett's chest. She pulled her car into the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as she parked with practiced precision. She stared ahead at her home, the house that had once been her sanctuary, the place she dreamed of returning to after 2 long years of service in Europe. The sight should have been a balm to her weary soul, a return to normalcy after the turbulence of war. Yet instead, a gnawing unease settled in her stomach, a cold weight pressing against her chest. The walls of the house, the familiar rose bushes along the front porch, even the rusted mailbox, everything felt off-kilter, as though the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for something. "Home sweet home," Maria murmured, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She exhaled, trying to shake off the tightness in her shoulders, but her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, betraying the mixture of anticipation and dread swirling inside her. There was a part of her that longed for this moment, to walk back through the door and slip back into the routine of civilian life. But another part, a darker, quieter part, wondered if she could ever truly come back. The echoes of combat and loss lingered in her mind like distant memories of a different world. She hadn't asked for this, the distance between her and everything that had once felt familiar. She hadn't asked for the disconnection, the sense that she had become a stranger to the life she'd left behind. Maria grabbed her military duffel bag from the back seat, its familiar weight a reminder of her years spent in service, of all the things she had carried with her, literal and metaphorical. As she slammed the car door shut, the metal's harsh clang cut through the quiet, the sound amplifying in her mind. She adjusted the straps of her bag, standing still for a moment in the driveway, taking in the neighborhood. The air felt thick, laden with something that she couldn't quite place. The quiet streets, once filled with the sound of children playing or neighbors chatting over fences, now seemed muted, as though the world was waiting for something to happen. The clink of her combat boots against the gravel was the only sound that filled her ears as she walked toward the front porch, her military training kicking in. She was alert, too alert, as though there were danger lurking around every corner. A flicker of movement caught her eye, and she paused, narrowing her gaze at the window beside the door. The curtains, always drawn with careful precision, were now askew, the fabric pulled back just enough to reveal the blurred outline of a figure pacing inside. Her heart skipped a beat. "What the hell? Leo?" she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. Her hand hovered over the door handle, but she hesitated for a split second. She didn't know why, but something about the sight of those curtains, the unnatural shift in the familiar, unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The sound of birds chirping in the distance did little to ease the tension building in her chest. She stepped closer, squinting through the window. The figure inside didn't move like Leo. Her husband wasn't tall, but this person seemed taller, stranger. The person's pacing was erratic, quick and nervous, a far cry from the calm, deliberate movements of Leo when he was home. Maria's pulse quickened. "Who the hell is that?" she called again, louder this time. "Leo, is that you?" Silence answered her, the kind of silence that felt too heavy, too suffocating. A knot formed in her stomach as she reached for the door handle. Her instincts kicked in, a military precision taking over, and she twisted the knob. It creaked open with an eerie softness. The scent of musty air greeted her, a sharp contrast to the fresh outdoors. The door was never left ajar, never. She knew that for sure. Her boots crunched against the gravel again as she stepped into the entryway, her breath shallow. The scene that greeted her wasn't the one she expected. Boxes were strewn across the floor, a sign of hasty movement, furniture pushed aside as though something or someone had swept through the room with force. The pristine order of her home had been shattered, replaced by chaos. And then she saw them. 2 strangers, sitting on her couch, looking like they belonged there, like they'd been living there for far too long. A petite woman with wild curls, dressed in a tattered leather jacket, glanced up at Maria. Her eyes flicked over her with a sharp, calculating look. The woman didn't seem surprised. In fact, she seemed almost amused. "Who the hell are you?" Clara demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Maria stood frozen at the threshold, her breath caught in her throat. For a split second, she thought she might be hallucinating, Had she really just come home to this? She took a step forward, trying to steady her breathing, her mind racing. "This is my house," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Who are you?" Mark, the man on the other side of the room, didn't even look up from the couch. He leaned back, his tattoos stretching over his arms as he crossed them. His face broke into a smirk, one that spoke of cockiness, of entitlement. "Your house?" he scoffed, shaking his head like Maria was the one who didn't understand. "You must be mistaken. We have every right to be here." Her stomach twisted at the words, and for a moment all she could do was stare at them in disbelief. "What?" She glanced back at the doorway, a brief flicker of hope that maybe this was some sort of mistake. But no, this was real. The weight of the situation sank in like a stone in her gut. "What do you mean you have a right?" Maria echoed, her disbelief turning into anger. "This is my home. I've been serving overseas for 2 years. My husband—" "Your husband?" Clara interrupted, her arms crossed in a defensive stance. "He left this place unattended. We found it empty, so we decided to squat." The air in the room felt thick, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Maria clenched her fists, her military training kicking in as her posture stiffened, ready to react. "I'm going to call the police," she said, her voice suddenly steady. Mark grinned, a mocking glint in his eye. "Go ahead," he drawled, a tone of deep sarcasm lacing his words. "They'll just laugh at you. You think they care about a couple of squatters? You're going to need more than that." Clara let out a harsh laugh. "Besides," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "we've got paperwork." She pulled a crumpled sheet from her pocket and waved it in the air, as though it were a trophy. Maria's stomach twisted into knots. The last thing she expected to hear was that they had legal rights. She couldn't take it in. She felt the ground slip beneath her feet. This wasn't just about her home anymore. It was about everything she had fought for, everything she thought was secure, and whether or not it could ever truly be hers again. Maria's mind raced, and her breath quickened as she stood there, her hand gripping the doorframe like a lifeline. The words Mark had said echoed in her head, each one a sharp jab to the gut. "We have every right to be here." The paperwork, the threat, everything was so foreign, so out of place. She shook her head, trying to process the absurdity of it all. This isn't real. This can't be real. She glanced at the living room, the disarray overwhelming her senses. The curtains were half open, the sunlight filtering in at strange angles, as though the world outside was different from the one inside. The photographs that used to adorn the walls had been disturbed, now askew, some even missing. Where did they put them? Leo. Her voice cracked, the name falling from her lips like a prayer. She had no idea where he was, no idea how to fix this or even what this really was. Clara and Mark seemed unaffected by the gravity of the situation. Clara tapped her fingers impatiently against the arm of the couch, the sharp sound grating on Maria's nerves. Mark, too, was too calm, too confident, like this was a game they had already won. The smugness in his expression made Maria want to scream. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We have many more important and exciting stories for you. And also write what city you are watching us from. "Look, I don't know who you think you are," Maria started, her voice shaky but firm. "But this is my house. I'm Maria Bennett. I've been serving overseas for 2 years. My husband—" She cut herself off, the words sticking in her throat as she suddenly realized that she couldn't even finish the sentence. "My husband." A sudden, cold pang of uncertainty sliced through her. "Where is Leo?" Clara's eyes sharpened as she leaned forward, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Oh, we know who you are, honey. We did our homework. We've got all the papers." She tossed the crumpled document onto the coffee table, and it slid to a stop near Maria's feet. Maria's eyes flicked down to the piece of paper, her stomach tightening. She wanted to reach down to tear it up, but something inside her hesitated. What if it was real? What if they had a claim? But no, this is my house. She couldn't let them win. Not like this. Her mind raced, but she forced herself to take a steadying breath. There had to be an answer, a way to fix this. Her training in combat had never prepared her for this kind of psychological warfare. She had fought on foreign soil, had faced death head-on, but nothing had prepared her for the quiet, insidious threat of someone taking what was hers without firing a single shot. "I'm calling the police," Maria said, her voice low, steady. She turned toward the door, but as her hand reached for her phone in her pocket, the buzz of an incoming call stopped her in her tracks. She yanked it out, her heart thumping wildly as she saw Leo's name flash on the screen. She answered quickly, her voice shaky with urgency. Leo, I'm home. You need to get here. There are people in our house. What do you mean, people? Leo's voice came through, calm but tinged with confusion. Are you sure they're not just friends? Or they're squatters? Maria snapped, frustration and fear bleeding into her words. They claim they have legal rights to be here. They won't leave. She felt a flare of anger rise within her, the helplessness she'd felt only moments before now fueling her words. Leo, you have to get here. Now. There was a pause on the other end, and Maria could almost hear the wheels turning in Leo's mind. She imagined him sitting somewhere, perhaps at work, his life as it had been before her deployment continuing as if nothing had changed. He hadn't been through what she had. He hadn't seen what she had seen. Stay calm, I'll be there as fast as I can, Leo said, his voice steady, but there was an undertone of urgency. She hung up without responding, the words, stay calm, reverberating in her mind like an echo she couldn't shake. Calm? How could she stay calm when everything she had fought for was crumbling in front of her? Her home, her sense of security, everything that was supposed to be her foundation was slipping through her fingers. Clara, sensing Maria's rising tension, leaned back against the couch with a satisfied smile. Oh, this should be good. Let's see what your husband has to say, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Maria's grip tightened on the phone as her gaze flicked toward the front door. The silence that followed felt suffocating, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She turned back to Clara and Mark, her mouth suddenly dry. I don't care what you think you have. This is my home. I've fought for it. I've sacrificed for it, and I'll fight to keep it. Clara's laugh cut through the room, hollow and mocking. Fight all you want, she said, standing up and walking toward Maria. We're not going anywhere. Maria's heart thundered in her chest as she faced Clara, the defiance in her eyes mirroring her own growing anger. It wasn't just about a house anymore. This was personal. It was about every veteran who came home to find their lives upended, their homes violated, their very purpose questioned. Mark, who had been silently watching the exchange, finally spoke up. His tone was laced with a mixture of disbelief and challenge. You're just another homeowner trying to push us out. You think you're any better than us? You think you're entitled to this place just because you served? Maria's breath hitched, and she looked at Mark, the words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. He didn't know. He couldn't know. How could he? He didn't know what it was like to give everything, your body, your mind, your soul, and come back to find that what you fought for had been stolen from you. I'm not better than you, Maria said, her voice soft but firm, but I've earned the right to call this place my home, and I won't let anyone take that from me. The air between them crackled with tension, the unspoken challenge hanging heavy in the room. Maria stood her ground, her fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when everything she cared about was on the line. Suddenly, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke through the tension, a welcome sound that made Maria's heart race. Leo had arrived. She rushed toward the door, flinging it open just as Leo stepped onto the porch, his face a mix of concern and confusion. He looked past Maria and saw Clara and Mark on the couch. His eyes narrowed and his posture shifted, protective, like he was ready to confront whatever threat lay inside. Maria? He asked, his voice low and urgent as he took in the scene. What the hell is going on? Maria took a deep breath and stepped closer to Leo, her voice steadying as she explained. They're squatting here. They think they can take over our home. Mark's smirk widened as he leaned back against the couch. We're not going anywhere, buddy. You should have thought about that before you left. Leo's jaw tightened, and he took a step forward, his stance growing more threatening. Get out, he said, his voice low and dangerous. This is our house, and you don't belong here. Clara's bravado faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Or what? She asked, her tone dripping with defiance. You'll call the cops? They don't care about people like us. We have rights. We have rights too, Maria retorted, stepping closer to Leo, her voice unwavering. And we're not backing down. You need to leave. Now. Leo's protective instincts flared as he stood shoulder to shoulder with Maria. He was ready to face whatever was coming. You have no idea who you're messing with. My wife is a decorated veteran. You think you can scare us off? Mark scoffed. Decorated veteran or not, it doesn't matter, he said, crossing his arms. You're just another homeowner trying to push us out. Is that what you think? Maria said, her voice steady with resolve. You're wrong. I won't let you take what's mine. I'm ready to fight for my home. The tension in the room reached a breaking point, and for a moment, neither side moved. But then Clara stepped forward, a final challenge in her eyes. Fight all you want. We're not leaving without a fight of our own." "Well," Leo said, his jaw tightening, "then let's make this interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We have many more important and exciting stories for you. And also write what city you are watching us from." The evening settled over Willow Grove like a thick blanket, the kind that made the air feel heavier, suffocating. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the neighborhood bathed in the soft, lingering glow of twilight. Maria stood in the front yard, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she looked at Leo. His jaw was clenched, eyes narrowed, his protective instincts now a tangible force. He wasn't the type to back down. She could feel his resolve, but there was a quiet tension between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that this battle wasn't just for the house. It was for everything they had fought for, everything they had hoped would remain untouched. Inside the house, Clara and Mark had become quieter, their defiance slowly giving way to unease. Mark, who had once been so brash, now seemed to shrink under Leo's unwavering gaze. He still carried the arrogance of someone who believed they had all the cards, but Maria could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. Clara, on the other hand, stood tall, her posture still brimming with that fierce, untouchable energy, but Maria could sense a crack in her armor. Neither of them had expected Leo to show up, let alone for him to be so unyielding. "Stay close," Leo murmured to Maria, his voice low, his eyes never leaving the squatters. She nodded, though the pit in her stomach didn't subside. The weight of the situation hung over her, a quiet storm just waiting to break. Then, as if summoned by the tension itself, the sound of engines roared in the distance. The deep rumble grew louder, vibrating through the ground, shaking the very foundation of Willow Grove. Maria's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the sound. Motorcycles. A lot of motorcycles. "Who the hell is that?" Mark muttered, standing up from the couch, a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. Clara's eyes narrowed, and she instinctively moved closer to him. Leo turned his head slightly, his lips curling into a small, knowing smile. "It's the Iron Patriots," he said, his voice steady, almost calm, "and they don't like squatters." The Iron Patriots had long been a fixture in the local area, a group of veterans, former soldiers turned guardians, who had found a sense of camaraderie in each other after their service ended. They didn't wear uniforms or march in formation, but when they moved, people noticed. The sound of their bikes, the heavy thrum of engines, was enough to instill a sense of both fear and respect. They were veterans, like Leo, but their bond extended beyond shared military experience. It was about survival, about protecting their own, and about giving back to a country that had often forgotten them. As the Iron Patriots approached, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the house like a silent warning. Hank, the leader of the group, was at the front, his towering frame outlined against the fading light. His leather jacket, adorned with patches and worn with years of use, rippled with the power of someone who had fought hard and won countless times before. "Stay inside," Leo murmured to Maria, his hand briefly resting on her shoulder before he moved toward the door. "I've got this." Maria nodded, though her instinct was to follow him. The Iron Patriots were here, and they were ready to make a statement. Meanwhile, the Iron Patriots had gathered in their clubhouse, a dimly lit room thick with the smell of cigars and the faint scent of motor oil. The walls were lined with trophies and patches, each a testament to the years of hard-fought battles, some literal, some metaphorical, that had brought them together. Hank stood at the head of the long wooden table, his rough hands spread out over a map of Willow Grove. "All right, brothers," Hank's voice rumbled through the room, low and steady, commanding the attention of every person present. "We've got a situation. The Bennetts are being squeezed out of their home by a couple of squatters. We're going in to show those punks that the Iron Patriots don't take kindly to bullies." Joe, a wiry veteran with a quick smile, was the first to speak. "Let's not go in guns blazing. We don't need to escalate things. Let's just let our presence be known. If they see us, they'll think twice about sticking around." The room nodded in agreement, the sound of boots shifting on the floor and glasses clinking filling the air. The Patriots didn't want violence, they wanted respect, and they wanted to protect the people who had served alongside them. The stakes were personal for every one of them. Hank grinned, his blue eyes flashing. "Let's show them we're not messing around." Clara and Mark sat in the dimly lit living room, the oppressive silence weighing on them as they listened to the sound of the approaching motorcycles. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tapping anxiously on the armrest. She had heard stories about the Iron Patriots, their reputation was legendary, but she hadn't truly believed it until now. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. "What if they come for us?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. She tried to hide the fear creeping into her chest, but it was clear in the way she fidgeted. "I've heard stories about those bikers. They don't play nice." Mark scoffed, but his eyes were wide with unease. "We've been fine so far. They don't know we're here. We can stay hidden. Just keep your head down." Clara didn't feel reassured. She shook her head, her thoughts spiraling. What if they find us? What if they? Her voice trailed off, the fear growing as the sound of engines intensified. "Shh," Mark hissed, cutting her off as his eyes darted toward the window. The low rumble of engines reverberated through the walls, vibrating in the bones of the house. "Did you hear that?" Clara held her breath as she heard the distant growl of approaching bikes, closer now. Her pulse raced, the air in the room thick with dread. It was only a matter of time before they found them. "They're coming," Clara whispered, her breath shaky. "We need to leave, now." Mark hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the back exit. "But where will we go? We can't just run out into the night." "Anywhere but here," Clara insisted, her fear pushing her into action. "They're going to find us. I can feel it." As the Iron Patriots rolled into the neighborhood, the roar of their engines reverberated through the streets like a thunderstorm on the horizon. The bikes lined up outside the Bennett home, the sound of their engines slowly dying down as the men dismounted with purpose. The tall figure of Hank led the group, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel as he approached the house. His eyes scanned the dilapidated property, his expression hardening at the sight of the neglected home. "This place has seen better days," Hank muttered, shaking his head. He motioned for the others to follow him. "Let's see if we can't help the Bennetts reclaim what's theirs." The group approached the front door, the sense of inevitability hanging in the air. Every step they took seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 battles fought and won. They had seen the worst of the world, and they weren't afraid to stand up for what was right. Not anymore. Hank knocked on the door, the sound of his knuckles against wood echoing like a gunshot in the silence of the evening. "Bennett family," he called out, his voice commanding and full of authority. "Open up." Inside, Clara and Mark exchanged panicked glances. The time for running was slipping away. "What do we do?" Clara whispered urgently, her heart pounding in her chest. Mark's gaze darted around the room looking for an escape. "We can't let them in. If they see us, just go," Clara urged, already slipping toward the back exit. "We have to get out before they find us." But before they could make their move, the door creaked open, and Hank filled the doorway, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the room. "We just want to talk," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You don't have to be afraid." Clara froze, her breath caught in her throat. She had no idea who these men were, but the authority in Hank's voice sent a ripple of fear through her. "We're the Iron Patriots," Hank continued, glancing back at his brothers. "We're here to help the Bennetts. We want you to leave this property peacefully. It's not yours, and you know it." Mark, unable to keep his bravado intact, stepped forward, trying to mask his fear. "And what if we don't want to?" The Iron Patriots shifted as one, their postures hardening. Joe, the pragmatic one, spoke up. "You don't want to find out," he said, his voice low and calm. "We're not here to fight, but we won't stand by and let you bully those who can't defend themselves." Clara's eyes darted to Mark, her mind racing. She could see it in his eyes. He knew they were outmatched. "What do you want?" Clara asked, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. "A chance for you to leave before this gets messy," Hank said, his voice measured, calm. "You can walk away with your pride intact, or you can stay and face the consequences." Mark's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. The panic crept back into his voice as he looked at Clara. "We can't stay here," he admitted quietly. "Let's go." Clara nodded, her resolve finally crumbling. She turned to the bikers, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Fine. We'll leave. Just give us a moment." As they retreated into the shadows of the house, the Iron Patriots exchanged a silent glance, their faces a mix of relief and caution. With Clara and Mark's departure, the standoff had finally reached its conclusion. However, this was just the beginning of the story. The battle wasn't only for the house. It was a battle for justice, for honor, and for reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Part 3. The Battle for the Home. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We have many more important and exciting stories for you. And also write what city you are watching us from. The sun rose slowly the next morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The world outside the Bennett home seemed still, as though the events of the night before had somehow frozen time. But inside, Maria's thoughts were anything but still. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at the now empty space where Clara and Mark had once sat. It felt as if the storm had passed, at least for now, but the quiet only made the underlying tension more palpable. The squatters had left, but the questions remained, the fear, the uncertainty. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her home. The events of the past few days had triggered something deep within her, something that had been simmering ever since her return from Europe. She had always fought for others, but now it felt like the fight had come to her doorstep. Leo paced around the living room, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his face drawn with frustration. "I don't trust them, Maria," he muttered, his voice low and edged with anger. "Clara and Mark might be gone, but we don't know what's behind this. We don't know who's pulling the strings." Maria didn't respond immediately. Her mind was elsewhere. She thought of the crumpled document Clara had shown her, the one that claimed to give them rights to stay in the house. It still bothered her, that piece of paper. What kind of system allowed something like that to happen? And why was it always the people who fought for their country, for their community, who ended up on the losing side? She stood up slowly, the weight of the decision bearing down on her. "I think we need to find out what's really going on," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "If someone's trying to take our home, we need to know who they are and why." Leo looked at her, his brow furrowed. He opened his mouth to protest, but she raised her hand, stopping him. "I'm not going to let this go," she said. "I've fought too hard to let someone else take what's mine." Leo sighed, the weariness of the past few days settling on his shoulders. "I know, Maria. I know." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his eyes. "But this is bigger than just us. If they had legal rights, we could be looking at something a lot more complicated than just squatters." Maria's gaze hardened. "Then let's make it less complicated." She turned toward the door, determination settling over her. "We need to figure out who's behind this. And I'm not going to wait around for someone else to do it." The hours that followed were a blur. Maria and Leo made a series of calls, reaching out to local officials. Supposed legal claim Clara and Mark had used. But the more they dug, the more questions arose. There was no record of a legitimate claim on their property, no deed transfer, no legal filing that matched the documents Clara had shown them. It didn't make sense. That night they sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, their minds racing. Maria glanced over at Leo, who was rubbing his temples, clearly exhausted. She could feel the same weight bearing down on her, but she wouldn't stop. Not now. "Do you think they were working with someone?" Maria asked quietly, her eyes focused on the documents in front of them. "Someone behind the scenes?" Leo leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on his face. "It's possible. But who would want to do something like this to us?" Maria stood up, her eyes narrowing. "We've got to think bigger. This isn't just about us. There's a system in place that's failing us, failing veterans, failing homeowners like us." Leo's eyes flicked to her, understanding beginning to seep in. "You think someone's targeting veterans?" Maria didn't answer right away. She turned toward the window, staring out at the quiet street. Her thoughts drifted to the Iron Patriots, the group of veterans who had come to their aid. She had seen something in them last night, something familiar. They were not just fighters. They were people who had been let down by a system that didn't honor them, didn't protect them, didn't care about their sacrifice. And then it hit her. The squatters weren't just an isolated incident. They were a symptom of something much larger, a system that had failed not just her, but every person who had ever put on a uniform, every person who had fought for a place to call home. "We need to talk to Hank," Maria said, her voice tight with resolve. "The Iron Patriots. They might know something we don't." The following morning, Maria and Leo drove to the clubhouse, a converted warehouse just outside of town where the Iron Patriots gathered. The place was rough around the edges, but the familiar scent of leather and the low hum of conversation made Maria feel a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in days. As they stepped inside, the room grew quiet. Veterans turned their heads, their eyes sizing them up, but Hank stood at the center, his commanding presence making the room settle into an almost respectful silence. "You two came at the right time," Hank said, his voice deep and gravelly. "We've been talking about you. You've got guts, Maria, and you're not the only one dealing with this." Maria's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Are there others?" Hank motioned for them to sit, and the two of them took their places at the worn wooden table. "You're not the first to face this. There's been an uptick in cases like yours. People coming home, only to find that their homes are being taken by squatters, by shady investors, even by the government. Leo's jaw tightened. The government? Hank nodded grimly. It's not a conspiracy, Leo. There's been a rise in what they're calling eminent domain abuse. Investors and developers are targeting veterans, using loopholes to take homes when the owners aren't around. They're banking on the fact that you're out there fighting for this country, while they steal what you've worked for. Maria's blood ran cold. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. They weren't just fighting for their home, they were fighting for something much bigger. The system that was supposed to protect them, to honor them, had turned against them. It had turned against all veterans. You're not the first ones, Maria, Hank said softly, and you won't be the last. But you've got something we all need, a chance to make a stand. Maria felt a fire ignite in her chest. We'll take it, she said, her voice steady. We'll take it all the way. The decision was made. Maria and Leo, with the help of the Iron Patriots, would fight back, not just for their home, but for every veteran who had been wronged by the system. They would expose the truth behind the fraudulent claims, the shady investors, the corruption that had stolen what belonged to them. It wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about reclaiming their dignity, their place in the world. Over the next few days, the community began to rally behind them. Neighbors, veterans, and even strangers came forward to help, offering support, resources, and most importantly, their voices. The fight for the Bennett home had become a symbol of a larger struggle, one that transcended the boundaries of their quiet neighborhood. As Maria and Leo stood together, watching their community come together, something shifted inside them. This wasn't just about protecting their home. It was about fighting for what was rightfully theirs, and ensuring that no one would ever have to face the same injustice again. The battle for their home had only just begun, but with the support of the Iron Patriots and the strength of their community behind them, Maria and Leo were more determined than ever to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Rebuilding the community. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We have many more important and exciting stories for you. And also write what city you are watching us from. The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The battle for the Bennett home had taken on a life of its own, rippling through the community in ways Maria had never anticipated. Neighbors, veterans, and even strangers who had heard about the injustice began to rally behind them. The weight of their collective support gave Maria and Leo a sense of strength they hadn't felt in weeks. What had started as a personal fight had become something much larger, a fight for justice, a fight for every person who had ever felt powerless in the face of a system that had abandoned them. The Iron Patriots were at the center of it all, not just as soldiers but as leaders in a fight that transcended their own needs. Hank, Joe, and the others worked tirelessly, helping Maria and Leo navigate the murky waters of the legal system. They weren't just offering advice, they were in this fight with them, standing side by side as they exposed the corruption that had targeted veterans like them. The community, once quiet and fractured, was now united in a common cause. Everyone had a stake in this, whether they were veterans, homeowners, or people who simply believed in fairness. And with every passing day, the momentum grew. It was a cool evening when Maria stood outside her house, looking out at the street. The sun had just set, casting a warm orange glow over Willow Grove. She could hear the sounds of neighbors gathering, the murmur of voices rising as people came together to discuss the upcoming legal battle. Leo stood beside her, his arm draped over her shoulders. His eyes were scanning the crowd, his expression unreadable. It wasn't just about the fight anymore. It was about rebuilding, not just their home, but their lives. The war they had fought in Europe had been brutal, but this felt like a different kind of battle, one that was personal and necessary. "Can you believe this?" Maria asked softly, her eyes scanning the crowd. "This is our home, Leo. It feels surreal." Leo nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "It's a new reality," he said quietly, "one we fought to create." Maria took a deep breath, the weight of everything they had been through sinking in. She had fought for this home, for the stability it represented, but what she hadn't expected was the sense of community that had emerged from the ashes of their struggle. People who had once been strangers were now standing together, side by side, ready to defend what was rightfully theirs. "This isn't just our home anymore," Maria said, her voice full of emotion. "It's everyone's. They came together for us." Leo looked at her, his eyes filled with pride. "Yeah," he said softly, "it's incredible." As the evening progressed, the neighborhood transformed. The once quiet street was now alive with energy. Tables were set up in the yard, adorned with colorful tablecloths and an array of food that reflected the diverse backgrounds of the residents. The Johnsons had brought barbecue, the Rodriguez family had empanadas, and Janice, the local baker, had brought her famous cupcakes. Maria stood at the center of it all, feeling a sense of warmth wash over her. She hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated that her fight for justice would result in something so beautiful. The laughter, the stories, the music, all of it was a testament to what could happen when a community came together, when they refused to let injustice stand. "Hey Maria, Leo," Janice called out, waving a box of cupcakes in her hands. "We brought cupcakes. You can't celebrate without sweets, right?" Leo chuckled, the sound light and full of relief. "Cupcakes?" he said, grinning. "Now that's a reason to celebrate." Maria laughed, the sound bright and airy. She felt the tension in her body ease as the warmth of the evening surrounded her. "You know what? You're right. Let's get this party started." The neighborhood had transformed into a festival of camaraderie. Children dashed through the yard, their shrieks of delight filling the air. The adults gathered in groups, sharing stories of their own struggles, their triumphs, and the ways in which they had supported each other through it all. Maria's heart swelled as she looked around. This wasn't just a celebration of their victory, it was a celebration of what it meant to fight for something larger than oneself. They had come together not just to defend a house, but to defend each other. Later in the evening, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Mr. Thompson, the retired school principal, approached with a glass in hand. "A toast," he called out, raising his glass high. "To the Bennetts, who remind us what it means to be a community." The crowd raised their glasses in unison, their voices ringing out in a chorus of celebration. "To the Bennetts," they cheered. Maria stood at the center of it all, her emotions threatening to spill over as she addressed the crowd. "Thank you, everyone," she said, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. "We've been through so much, and the love you've shown us, it's overwhelming. You've given us hope when we thought we'd lost it." Sarah, a single mother whose own house had been rebuilt after a fire years ago, stepped forward. "Hope is what we do best around here," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I know how it feels to start over. You're not alone in this. We're all here for you." Leo placed his hand on Maria's back, his voice full of emotion. "I can't tell you how much that means to us," he said, looking out over the crowd. "This community has stood strong through everything. I see now that it's not just about rebuilding walls, it's about rebuilding lives." The night carried on with stories shared and laughter filling the air. The sense of unity, of belonging, was stronger than ever. The neighbors had come together to defend Maria and Leo's home, but they had also come together to rebuild something far more important, a sense of community, of justice, and of mutual support. As the evening wore on, and the guests began to leave, Maria and Leo stood on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, watching the last of the fairy lights twinkle in the yard. The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as though they too were part of the celebration. "Tomorrow, we tackle the garden," Maria said, her voice light but filled with a sense of purpose. "I want it to be a sanctuary just like our home." Leo grinned, his enthusiasm rising. "Then let's make it happen," he said, his voice full of determination. "We've got a community behind us and I'm ready to roll up my sleeves." Maria raised an imaginary toast, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Here's to new beginnings," she said, her voice full of hope. "And to justice, camaraderie, and all the love in between." "Cheers to that," Leo echoed, his arm around her shoulders as they turned toward the house, ready to face whatever came next. As they stepped inside, hand in hand, Maria felt a surge of hope. The world outside their door was still filled with challenges, but with a community like Willow Grove, they were ready to face anything together. The fight had been long, and it wasn't over. But the victory wasn't just about reclaiming their home, it was about reclaiming their future, their sense of belonging, and the unbreakable bond they had with each other and with their community. If you found this interesting, be sure to subscribe to the channel and listen to the full story. And if you've seen or experienced something similar, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. All the best to you.